everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another video for the holiday card series for 2017. Today's day 12 and I'm going to be using the Majestic Mistletoe stamp set from Altenew. This is one of their builder stamp sets. Altenew is well known for these builder type of stamp sets, and it has different elements that help you stamp and kind of shade and give dimension to different elements. So I'm going to be making two different cards today. I'm going to have two different color schemes. In this first one, I'm using the Greenfields and Red Sunset combinations of inks from Altenew. And then for the other card, I'm going to be using a little bit less traditional colors, and I'm going to be using kind of more pinks and more teals. I'm using Seashore and Cherry Blossom. I'm actually only going to be using a couple shades from each of these color combination sets, and I'll tell you which ones I'm using as I go along here. So I have one of the solid images from the stamp set. I think there's actually 2 or 3 different stamps that you can combine for each one of these little sprigs of mistletoe, but I'm only going to be using 2 for each one. For this first green shade, I'm using the color Frayed Leaf, and this is the lightest green in that set, and I want you to take note of how dark these colors are when I first stamp them. This is actually my first experience with Altenew inks. I've had a few Altenew inks in my stash for a while, but I haven't had a chance to use them, and I thought I would go ahead and try on these cards. So you'll notice that it's actually quite dark when I first stamp them, and I didn't know that they would dry back quite a bit. So I think if I would have tested this out beforehand, I might have started with slightly darker colors. So I moved on to the other color combination. This is Mountain Mist, and I just kept that stamp in my MISTI tool so I could stamp it in the exact same place for the other color combination. So I'm actually going to stick with this color combination and figure out where I'm going to put the other leaf. I'm using the exact same stamp. I've just moved it so it's in a slightly different position. And once again, I'll stamp that in the color Mountain Mist. And after I've stamped this one, and I'll actually stamp it a couple times so it has a nice solid image here, I'm going to switch back over to the Frayed Leaf color for the other color combination. So especially take a note of how dark these colors are because they will fade back quite a bit. Part of why they fade back even more and look like they're a lot lighter is because I'm using craft cardstock for this. I'm using some Neenah Desert Storm cardstock. So because it's not against a stark white, that's another reason why it might look a little bit lighter. I'm now using Field Greens. This is the next darkest shade in that set, and I'm using the dimensional stamp, or the one that adds a little bit of shading to the interior areas of the leaves on this mistletoe. So you'll notice that it adds just a little bit of darkness to that area. You can see the difference between the two leaves. I'm now using Volcano Lake for the other color combination, and I love how Altenew stamps, when they're designing the stamps, they think about where the shading would be for each of these elements. They have a lot of building stamp sets that are flowers, and they're absolutely gorgeous. So I was really excited to see that they have kind of more holiday greenery type stamp set in this Majestic Mistletoe. So the leaf shapes are pretty much done. I'm going to add some berries just to finish out the entire kind of scene here. So I'm going to be using Crimson, and this is on the more traditional color palette. I'm just inking up those berries. I'm going to stamp it once over onto the leaves, and then I'll go ahead and switch it out and move to the other color combination. I'm using Rubeletto, I think that's how you say it, and it's just a nice kind of raspberry berry shade. I'm going to use the same exact berry stamps for the other sprig of mistletoe, the other little twig of mistletoe, and once I have that down, that completes the actual mistletoe stamping. Now in the stamp set, there is an additional stamp that adds a darker dimensional shade onto those berries. I decided not to do that. I just decided to keep it fairly simple and just do the one color for the berries. And it turns out well because later I'll be adding some Wink of Stella on top. So I'm going to add a greeting on top of this entire area, and I'm going to be stamping it and embossing it. And because I'm doing heat embossing and this heat embossing powder will stick to anything that has any bit of moisture, I'm doing a test run. I'm making sure that this entire area is completely dry and it's not going to give me any problems later. So I actually had to test this twice. I used an anti-static powder tool, I used my heat tool, and then I really tested it. And at this point, it got nearly all the powder off. None of the powder stick to areas where I didn't want it. So I thought I would probably be okay to move ahead. So there are a few different word stamps in the same stamp set, and I thought I would have it say merry and bright. It also has the word be, so you could combine them all to have it say be merry and bright. But I decided to just do merry and bright. And I started with the ampersand that's included, and I put that kind of nestled down into that area between the two sprigs. I then stamped the word bright, and I added the embossing powder on top as well. So this embossing powder that I'm using is Alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. It's kind of like my favorite white embossing powder as of late. It's a really finely milled powder. It's great for sentiment stamps like this, and it's really detailed. So after I had that stamped on there, I'm almost done. I'm just going to add a little bit of white to the other areas of the card by using my T-square ruler and drawing a dashed line. And the reason why I added this was because I really felt like that greeting was just kind of floating there, and none of the images were touching the edges of the card, which generally is fine. It just depends on what your design is. But I really wanted to add a little bit more white, kind of anchoring that greeting area. So I scored my card bases at 5.5 to create side folding cards. I'm using some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White in 110 pound. And then I punched all 4 corners on my stamped pieces. This is a 1/2 inch corner rounder. And then I adhered it down onto the card bases using some foam adhesive. And like I mentioned earlier, I did add a little bit of detail onto these berries. I just took a clear Wink of Stella glitter brush pen and went over all those berries. So those are the cards for today. Such a simple design. Notice how faded back those colors are. They really did dry back quite a bit. If I was to do this again, I think I'd make them a little bit darker, but even the way they are now, I think they're really beautiful and very subtle. So thanks so much for watching. I will catch you guys on Wednesday for day 13.